Today we're going to talk about cooking with honey, and we have as People and Pollinators Action Network, which is a nonprofit that I co-founded along with several other like-minded folks. I think we're about 8 years old now. But I own B Squared Apiaries, and this presentation is generously supported by the National Honey Board at honey.com. So this is a cave drawing from Spain that was found was created a long time ago and found not too terribly long ago. But it just illustrates that the honeybee has been present and interacting with humanity for a really long time. And I always like to look at this particular piece of art and think to myself what it must have been like to be a caveman cruising across the earth and to come across something that was so different than your regular diet. So you would have had berries that didn't taste like the ones that you've got now. You would have had roots, you would have had meat, but you would not have had anything at all in the way of sweet until you found a honeybee hive. And people have been addicted to honey ever since this started. You can see this fella here is in quite a predicament. He's up on this ladder with trying to get the honey out of this cave hole. And these bees are trying to protect their honey at the same time. So yes, honey has been around for a really long time. And what is honey? People will come up to me all the time. It's like, oh, are they bees making, honey from the pollen? And it's like, no, they do not make honey from pollen. They make honey from nectar. Pollen is baby food. So the bee has a special stomach inside of its abdomen that's called a honey stomach. And it will go out, she will go out to the plants and she will collect the nectar and she will store it in her special honey stomach. And then she will return to the hive and she will pass that nectar off to a house bee to put inside a cell. While that nectar is being carried around by the bees, it is being subjected to all of this enzymatic activity by the honey stomach. And that will start the process of converting those nectars into honey. And they will put those, that honey or that nectar at that point into the cell. And then when they have it to the point where they like it in terms of how thick it is and how much moisture it contains, they will put a little capping on it. And so they will actually evaporate that honey down to that proper moisture content by wagging their wings, vigorously, vigorously fanning their wings in order to dry that honey. So that is a really long definition of what goes on, but it is how it happens. So it's nectar, and then it combines with the enzymes of the bee honey stomach. It gets moved off to a house bee and put into the honey section of the hive. It gets evaporated by fanning of the wings, and boom, it goes into a jar. There's nothing else that we do to it except get it out of the hive at that point. Whoops. So there are a ton of benefits to honey. Many of these are exceedingly well documented. And so I'm not going to go into all of the science behind all of it, but suffice it to say that it's an antifungal, an antiviral, and antibacterial. It's an outstanding source of antioxidants and is a natural humectant. What is a humectant? A humectant is something that draws moisture from the environment. And so I have to say that that is the primary reason that I use honey almost all the time in baking, because it draws moisture from the air. And here in this low humidity environment in which we all operate, it keeps your baked goods fresher longer. There are two primary types of honey. The first one is called varietal honey. And this is a honey that is made primarily from the nectar of a single type of flower. Here at B Squared, we produce two different types of varietals. We produce an early season clover, and then we produce a later season alfalfa. But there are over 300 different varietals in the United States alone. So there are, you've probably all heard of lavender honey from France. That is a varietal. And that is a honey that is made from the nectar of the lavender plants that you see in those glorious pictures of Provence, France. Here in Colorado, alfalfa and clover are our primary production, but there's some minor production of some other ones, mesquite and sage down in the Southwest. At any rate, I put this link to this varietal guide because I thought it was quite good and that you all might enjoy it. And I would strongly suggest that as you travel across the country or across the world, that you try out the honeys from the places that you visit because there's such variety in the flavors of these. So varietals are the main source of honey. And then I have a couple of pictures here, neither of which is very good. So I apologize for that. But the one on the left is a photo of a honey tasting I did for the Slow Food Summit a couple of years back. And we started at 6:30 there with the lightest honey. And we went around clockwise on that tray to this darkest honey, which was actually an avocado honey here, and tasted all of these different varietals in the course of one sitting. That was a baker's dozen, if I recall correctly. And I have to say that that's a little too much honey in one sitting. So if you decide to do something fancy like a varietal honey tasting, bear in mind that people can get kind of OD'd on it. But they sure had a lot of fun. Sure had a lot of fun. And then this right picture is actually something called a honey wheel. And this honey wheel is it was developed by UC Davis's Honey Institute, Mead Making Institute, in conjunction with the Robert Mondavi Foundation, and which is the winemakers. And they sat down and tasted all these honeys and had came up with this wheel of all of these different flavors that are found within various varietal honeys. And so when you're involved in a judging contest, they're going to be using these wheels to try and isolate what the flavors are within that honey. So in addition to varietal honeys, we have infused honeys. B Squared, my honey company, makes lots of infused honeys, but infused honeys are not the product of the nectars of those flowers. They have things that are added into them. So sometimes people will call me up and say, "Oh, do you produce lavender honey?" No, I do not, nor do I infuse lavender honey. But if you are a consumer and you're looking at a honey jar, the easiest way to tell whether it is a varietal or whether it's an infusion is by looking at that ingredient label. And if it says 100% lavender honey, then that is different than honey and lavender. So honey and lavender means lavender has been added to some sort of varietal of honey, and lavender honey is a varietal honey. So we cannot produce lavender honey in this country, actually, because we do not have any area of this country that looks like Provence does. Bees travel a 2.5 mile radius from the hive. That is a big chunk of change. That's like 12,000 acres, and we just don't have any lavender plantings that meet their criterion that will allow us to create a varietal honey that has over 50% of the nectar from a single plant. So, so we infuse with lots of different things. We have rose petal infused honeys. We've got chili infused honeys. We've got espresso infused honeys, great variety of stuff, but we're not the only people doing that. So if you see something that strikes your fancy, check it out. There's also people that are doing CBD and THC products here in the state, and you can find them too if you want to give those a shot. People always want to know what the difference is between honey and sugar. So here in a nutshell is what it is. Okay, so it's a different fructose glucose combination. It is got because it has a 70% total of fructose and glucose combined. There are other things contained within honey, which include water, pollen, and minerals. It is lower on the glycemic index, but that doesn't mean you can go crazy with it. And it's sweeter than sugar, so you can actually use less. And it's also less processed than sugar. And if you're buying honey from somebody like myself, it's not processed at all. And so if you know your local beekeeper, not only will you have less processed sugar, you will have less processed honey, you will have no processed honey, just taken straight from the hive and put into a jar. Okay, fun facts about honey. Okay, it takes the nectar of 2 million flowers to make 1 pound of honey. That is correct. That is not a lie. I don't know how somebody figured that out, but that is incredible amount of work that goes in to make 1 pound of honey. A bee makes a 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey in its life. That is not a half. That's a 1/12. Think about that. So one bee's entire life's work, 12 bees' entire life's work goes into 1 teaspoon of honey. And a colony will travel 55,000 miles to produce a single pound of honey. So these are incredible numbers, and they should make you feel love for your jar of honey when you realize how much work has gone into the production of it. And one of the things that people always ask me is, why does honey crystallize? And honey is simply a supersaturated solution that comes out of solution in the absence of heat. So in a beehive, bees keep the interior temperature of the hive roughly floating around 100 degrees all day, every day. And so, so as soon as we take it out of the hive, when we don't keep it at 100, we're going to start this process of moving it into a crystallized state. And so honey will crystallize unless it has been ultra heated for shelf life, which is what happens when you buy honey at the grocery store. But it is the only food without a shelf life. And if you need to take it from a crystallized state and into a liquid state, you just need to gently warm it. But for Christ's sakes, don't throw it out. Okay. I hate it when people tell me, oh, I threw it out. And it's like, God, you threw out 500,000 flowers worth of honey just in one fell swoop because you didn't know how to warm it up. So please, please, please don't ever throw out your honey. It's perfectly good. And lots of people, Europeans, for example, prefer to have a crystallized honey because that way they know it is a raw product, and then they can spread it that much thicker on their sandwiches, and it's going to melt when they put it into their coffee or their tea anyway. So it's perfectly usable in that state. It's just not what we're used to here in America. Okay, if we're going to be cooking with honey, then many times we're going to be substituting honey for sugar. And so these are just my rules of thumb. I look on the web and I am going to see a million different things that tell you to edit recipes to do X, Y, or Z with honey to substitute for sugar. I underline this statement because I absolutely do not make any adjustments for liquid versus dry the first time I make a recipe. And if you think about it, many of the original recipes that are out there started out as honey recipes and got converted to sugar as sugar came into cheap production. And, every farm used to have a beehive on the farm so that they could have honey for their recipes. So a lot of times you can convert it back to honey without making any adjustments, and it's exactly the same thing. Sometimes I'll make like muffins and they won't have quite enough of a dome on them, or cupcakes, and they won't have quite enough of a dome on it because of that liquid dry change that we've done in there. And if so, then I'll just go ahead and add a 1/4 cup of flour the next time I make it, so it's not flat and it's got that dome that I want to look at it when I make a cupcake. So that's all I do about that. I wouldn't get all caught up on that. But the other thing that I'd like to tell people to do is that there's a ton of things that require just a little tiny bit of a sweetener. So for example, if you're a bread baker and you are wanting to get your yeast to start, you don't have to use sugar. You can use honey. It works just great. You can use it anytime I see something that calls for a teaspoon of brown sugar or a teaspoon of molasses or whatever. I just change it out for honey. And it will taste virtually the same, especially on those little tiny quantities like that. What I put together at this point, and I have to say with considerable help from my crack staff, in particular Jamie Erickson and his girlfriend Sam Black, really helped a tremendous amount with videos. So we do have a few hilarious, I think, videos. And we are going to go ahead and take a look at some of these varietal honey recipes right now. So the first one we've got is going to be this fig and pistachio studded goat cheese. And I'll try not to laugh out loud while we play it.
Hi, it's Beth Conrey, and today we're going to do some cooking with honey. I like to cook with honey morning, noon, and night. Well, why? Because I got a lot of honey. But you may not have as much, so let's cook it carefully with your honey. Today we are sponsored by the National Honey Board, and so we have selected several recipes from the National Honey Board website to make for our demo. We're going to start with our fig and pistachio encrusted goat cheese recipe. I have it right here next to me, and I'm just going to read the directions and do what it says. So it says, sprinkle the pistachios and figs on a parchment-lined sheet pan. Okay, I'm a cheapskate. I used wax paper, and I forgot the sheet pan, but I think we'll be okay anyway. So I'm going to sprinkle the pistachios, which I've already cut, and I'm going to sprinkle the figs, which I have also already cut into roughly the same size pieces. I'm going to kind of schmoozle them together so there's a good mixture of them in there. Kind of flatten it out a little bit there so we get good coverage. And it says it wants a log of goat cheese, so we have a goat cheese right here. We'll take it out of its package and put it right on those figs and pistachios. So, there we are. One goat cheese and fig and pistachio wrapped goat cheese log.
Okay, so you may have noticed in that video that it doesn't say anything about honey. I didn't notice it, but my husband did. And so here is the actual picture from the National Honey Board website. And you can see that you put a pool of honey underneath the goat cheese log, and then you drizzle some honey across the top, and bada bing, bada boom. You have got yourself this fig and pistachio studded goat cheese. This was absolutely delicious. It literally took 2 to 3 minutes to make. This is something that you can make in advance of any party. You can bring it to a party and be a hero. So certainly consider adding that to the repertoire. All of these recipes that we're sharing today are hyperlinked to the National Honey Board website. And the National Honey Board website is honey.com, as you can see here, because I accidentally hit one of those links. Okay, let's go on to another one. Okay, this is one that this is a guy that I have been really playing around with a ton of his work right now. He is an Israeli chef that is owns a bunch of restaurants in London, and I believe he's got one in New York City now, and his name is Yotam Ottolenghi. And Yotam Ottolenghi is just super creative with real simple foods. So this here is a burrata with grilled grapes and basil. I did not have a video of this, and it is not currently hyperlinked, but I am putting it up on my website today. And I will hyperlink this slide before we put it up onto our YouTube channel. So you'll be able to go to bethspees.com and find this recipe. But this is these grilled grapes and basil with burrata cheese. Super simple, super outstanding. There's not a single person that has ever heard of a grilled grape until you make this. And they're delicious. They're absolutely delicious. So give that one a try once we get that recipe up on there. Or if you have Yotam Ottolenghi's books, it is in Simple is the one that it's in. Next, we did a salad. I have 2 salads. And this one here, this kale and apple salad with a honey Dijon dressing I made last night. It is outstanding, actually. I'm not a big kale fan, but it always has appealed to me in the fall, as did the rest of the ingredients in this salad. So this salad had apples. It has dried cherries, which I didn't have, so I substituted dried cranberries, toasted walnuts, Parmesan cheese in there. And then the dressing was honey Dijon whoop-de-doo. Everybody has a honey Dijon recipe out there. You can buy it in a bottle. But this one actually had rosemary in it, fresh rosemary in it. And it really brought together those fall flavors and the flavors of the rest of the ingredients in the salad. And it was absolutely delicious last night. So I would encourage you to try it. This one, the next one, is one that if you have attended any of our fundraising events in the past, or you come over to my house and eat in the peach season, we make every single night for dinner until peaches are gone. And so we take fresh Colorado peaches, slice them thinly. We sprinkle it with Cambozola cheese. You can find Cambozola cheese at Cheese Importers Warehouse down in Longmont, but you can also find Cambozola at any major grocery store anymore. It's a half Camembert, half Gorgonzola is how the name originated. And so it's a blue cheese that is soft and creamy like a Camembert is. And then it's toasted pecans and chunks of honeycomb. It's just 4 ingredients. There's no dressing, no anything. And it's one of those umami kind of dishes where you've got the crunch, you've got the sweet, you've got the salt, you've got everything you want in your mouth all at once. And I would encourage you to try this when peaches are in season next year. If you have made it to pear season, which we have, you can change this recipe to have fresh pears, toasted walnuts instead of the toasted pecans. I just use a straight Gorgonzola or blue cheese and the honeycomb chunks, and it is equally as delicious for a fall meal. Jamie did this last night, this hot sweet broccoli and asparagus, said it was stunning. So let's watch Jamie's video.
Hello, my name is Jamie with B Squared Apiaries, and I will be going over a nice appetizer from honey.com, and it is a hot and sweet broccoli and asparagus. So I've already done the first couple steps. So the first direction is combine the honey, soy sauce, ginger, and red pepper. So I've done that here. The next step is to cut up broccoli and slice the asparagus, which I've already done right here. All right, so the third step, heat oil in large skillet, add broccoli and asparagus and stir fry over medium-high heat for 3 minutes. Then add half a cup of water to the pan, cover, and steam vegetables for 2 minutes. So the sauce consists of honey, soy sauce, ginger, and red pepper. So we got a 1/4 cup of honey. I am using our sweet heat, which is a spicy infused honey, chili pepper infused. You can also use a light clover honey or an alfalfa, whichever you prefer. We got a 1/4 cup of honey, 2 tablespoons of soy sauce, 1 teaspoon of ground ginger, and it says a 1/2 teaspoon to a 1/4 or 1/2 teaspoon to a full of crushed red pepper. I decided to use 1/2 teaspoon because we'll be having a little bit of spice from the honey itself. So we'll just keep it on the lower end of that. Okay, so we've been cooking those in the oil for the 3 minutes. So now I'm going to add some water, cover it, and cook it for a couple more minutes. I'm going to drain the rest of the water out of the pan and then add the sauce to it and cook it until it's nice and golden. Let's pour the sauce over it. All right, so we'll just cook that for a couple more minutes until it gets nice and thick, and then it'll be ready to serve.
Okay, so that is the hot and sweet broccoli and asparagus. Again, this is on the National Honey Board's website, honey.com. We also did some main courses for this video. This one is off of the National Honey Board's website. It's called Mediterranean Salmon Sheet Pan. I have absolutely no idea why it is called Mediterranean, because that green sauce that is on there is chimichurri, which is from Argentina. Okay, so I happen to love chimichurri. I have a good friend of mine that is from Argentina, and she has taught her husband how to make chimichurri. And so he gives me chimichurri. So this came down like a rocket in my kitchen last night. But the recipe, if you link to it off of here, to the Honey Board website, gives you a recipe for making your own chimichurri. And essentially, you just throw everything on a sheet pan, bake it for varying times based on how crunchy things start out, and then add that salmon to it, cook it for another 12-15 minutes. And it was super simple, super fast, and very tasty. So I was real happy with that. I make a lot of entrees with salmon, or excuse me, with honey. For this video, I actually have 2 salmon recipes, so I apologize for that, but it's because this one is a grilled Pacific Northwest salmon, which is out of the Silver Palick Good Times cookbook, and it is simply stunning. It is hyperlinked in this presentation when we put it up. You can also find it on my website, and try that the next time you are grilling and you've got some salmon, because it's absolutely stunningly good. One of our favorites. Next, we did dessert, and we decided to do these honey lemon bars. So we have another video for you, and let's play that.
Okay, and for dessert today, we're going to try some honey lemon bars. Honey and lemon are one of these classic combinations that I just absolutely love. So again, we are using a recipe from the dessert section of the National Honey Board website, honey.com. According to this one, we need to follow the following instructions. In a small bowl, combine flour and powdered sugar and mix well. I'm a big fan of using a Cuisinart to make things like pastries. And so since this is a pastry bottom on this, I have taken the flour and the powdered sugar and put it into the base of the Cuisinart. I have cut the butter into small squares, and I'm going to add it to the Cuisinart, and I'm going to go ahead and process it until it resembles coarse crumbs. Okay, we are done processing the butter and the flour and the powdered sugar. And we are ready to put it into our pan and press it down and bake it. There is our finished crust. We're going to go put it in the oven. We're going to bake it at 350 for 12 to 15 minutes until it's lightly browned, and we'll be back with you. Okay, so while our crust is baking on our honey lemon bars, we're going to go ahead and get that filling done. So we're going to start with the instructions, and they say into a bowl. Whisk together honey and eggs. So we have some fancy eggs from my neighbor's chickens down the road. I'll put 3 of them in here. And then we have our choice on honey once again. And this time, I again have a clover varietal honey and a alfalfa honey. And I am going to select the clover honey for the purposes of this recipe. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I would like less of a honey flavor and more of a balanced honey and lemon flavor. So I think I'm going to achieve that with a lighter honey. So I'm going to go ahead and pour out some clover honey into a measuring cup. The measuring cup I put a little bit of water into just to coat the sides to make it easier for me to get the honey out of the measuring cup when we're done trying to measure. We'll put our honey into our eggs.
Whisk things together.
Okay, all right, we've got our honey and eggs whisked together, and now we're going to add our remaining ingredients. So we need 2 tablespoons of flour. Oops, flour all over the counter. The next thing it calls for is lemon juice, but I'm looking a little bit further down the ingredients list, and it calls for lemon zest. You always want to zest your lemon before you try and juice your lemon. Okay, there's our zest in there. Then we need a ½ teaspoon of baking powder. And we need a ¼ teaspoon of salt. Oops, it sounds like our crust is about done. That's enough. Okay. Okay, so our bottom of our pastry is done. You can see we've got these little light golden edges on here. And I've got it sitting on that cooling rack for a few minutes while we finish up our filling. So we've got everything in there but the lemon juice, and let's get the lemon juice in there. One. And since I mostly use lemons for juice, I always go for those thin-skinned ones. Okay, so this lemon here had a little bit over 3 tablespoons of lemon juice in it. We'll add that lemon juice to the filling. And we're going to put it back into the oven and bake it for an additional 25 to 30 minutes. Okay, we're ready to go back in the oven.
Okay. All right. And so on that recipe from the National Honey Board, they do not top theirs with powdered sugar. I went ahead and sprinkled powdered sugar on mine because that's just more of a traditional preparation of honey lemon bars. And then I have one other fall dessert that is simply spectacular that I wanted to share with you today, which is a pear cheddar tart. This is a recipe that's modified from the Colorado Farmers Market cookbook. It can be found on my website, bethsbees.com, in the dessert section. But it is pears mixed with honey and some cornstarch for the bottom of it. And then on the top is a streusel topping that has cheddar cheese in it. And pears and cheddar are kind of like honey and lemon, one of these fabulous combinations. I use alfalfa honey when for the honey that's in this tart. And again, this is a simply magnificent, easy to prepare dessert. And you can just use a refrigerated pie crust, or you can make your own. Obviously, I make my own since it has it looks just exactly like a kid made it, but I made it. And but it's a good crust, and it's a great tart, and it's a perfect finish to a fall meal. So with that, we can open up microphones, Joyce, and if anybody has any questions, I am happy to take them at this time. Oh, here's some of these infused habanero and honey. Yes, sweet and hot is one of those beautiful things that I love in honey myself. Don's asking about how about volume versus weight. I do not make any changes to the recipe when I start. So if it calls for 3/4 cup sugar, I'm using 3/4 cup of honey. Now, there are some cookbooks that do weight, and I hadn't even thought about that. So that's a darn good question. And honey is 1.5 times heavier than other liquids, but I don't know how it matches up to sugar. If anybody has any thoughts on that, share them in the chat, would you? How about making jam with honey? Yesterday, I found a whole website while I was cruising around putting this presentation together on canning with honey. So I would definitely go ahead and give that a try. I have lots of friends that like using my honey to can with. And so it's a natural preservative. And so I think that you wouldn't have any problems with it. But I think there are people that are more of an expert on that front than I am. And so, feel free to do your own research and see how those results turn out. Okay. Any other questions? Great. Well, I want to thank everybody for attending today. And I hope you have fun trying out honey in your own kitchens. And I think we may try and do another recipe session in the spring or maybe in the summer and try some other recipes too. So thanks everybody. And thank you to the National Honey Board for their support of this presentation from both a financial standpoint as well as from a inspirational standpoint.